Can you imagine waking up one day and discovering that the system that was supposed to protect you had decided to destroy you? I'm not talking about negligence. I'm not talking about slow bureaucracy or casual incompetence. I'm talking about being deliberately transformed from victim to villain. About having your name, your story, your dignity ripped from you with the stroke of a pen. About being thrown into a category fraudster, criminal, liar, without a chance to defend yourself, without the right to reply, without anyone looking at you and asking, "Wait, does this make sense?" Claire Hamilton knew exactly what it was like. Because on an ordinary Tuesday morning, while preparing breakfast for her 2 children, while trying to maintain a routine that seemed normal but would never be again, she opened the mailbox and found an official envelope. The kind of envelope you know doesn't bring good news just by looking at it. Brown paper, printed letters, government stamp. She opened it, right there on the sidewalk, still in her bathrobe, and read, "Benefit canceled due to suspected fraud." 8 words. Just 8 words. But their impact was devastating. Claire read it again, then again, as if reading it multiple times would change the meaning. As if the words would rearrange themselves and make sense. But they didn't, because fraud. Fraud of what? She was a widow. Legally, her husband, James Hamilton, had died serving his country 2 years ago. He died in an accident during military training at an overseas base. He died doing the job he had chosen, because it was the only way to guarantee a decent future for his family. And now, the same country he had served was accusing his widow of fraud. The military survivor benefit wasn't a favor. It wasn't charity. It was a legal right. It was recognition of sacrifice. It was the government's way of saying, your husband gave his life. We're not going to leave you and your children destitute. But apparently, someone in some faceless office had decided that Claire didn't deserve it. That there was something suspicious. That she was a criminal. Have you ever been through this? Ever felt the ground disappear from under your feet while you're still standing? Claire stood there, on the sidewalk, with that letter in her hand, trying to process what was happening, trying to understand. But there was no explanation in the letter, only accusation. Suspected fraud. No details, no specifications. Just a vague and absolute sentence that transformed her from a mother struggling to survive into the target of a government investigation. She went inside. She sat at the kitchen table. Her daughters, Emma, 8, and Sophie, 6, were eating cereal, talking about school, completely oblivious to the fact that the world had just crumbled again. Claire looked at them and felt a tightness in her chest so strong she could barely breathe. How was she going to explain this? How was she going to say that the money that paid for rent, food, clothes, everything had run out? That suddenly, without warning, without reason, they were back on the brink of financial ruin. She picked up the phone with trembling hands. She dialed the number on the letter. She waited through irritating hold music for 15 minutes. Finally, a bureaucratic and disinterested voice answered. "Veterans Assistance, how can I help you?" Claire tried to keep her voice calm. "I received a letter saying my benefit was canceled due to suspected fraud. I need an explanation? It has to be a mistake." Pause. Typing sound. Name, Claire Hamilton. More typing. "Yes, Ms. Hamilton. I see here that your case is under active investigation." "Investigation for what? I didn't do anything wrong." The voice on the other end grew colder. "You are under investigation for possible benefits fraud. Any attempt to contest this at this time will be interpreted as obstruction of the investigative process. We strongly recommend that you hire a lawyer." Claire's blood ran cold. Obstruction. I just want to know what I'm being accused of. I cannot discuss details of an active investigation. Good luck, Miss Hamilton. And the line died. Claire sat there, holding the silent phone, staring blankly, trying to process what had just happened. She had called asking for an explanation. A basic right of anyone accused of anything had been threatened. She had been told that questioning was a crime. that seeking justice was obstruction, and she had been told to hire a lawyer. With what money? The benefit that supported her and her daughters had just been cut off. She had no savings. She didn't have wealthy family. She had nothing but a rented house, 2 dependent children, and now an accusation of fraud she didn't understand. Stay with me until the end, because what happened to Claire in the following days wasn't just frustrating bureaucracy or an administrative error that could be corrected with a few phone calls. It was something far more sinister. It was a revelation of how a system that should protect the most vulnerable often transforms into their greatest predator, and how a woman alone, without resources, without a voice, without power, can be crushed by the gears of a machine that has no face, no conscience, and no pity. But it's also a story about something more. About what happens when someone finally pays attention. When someone looks at obvious injustice and decides they won't simply turn their back. When authority meets humanity. And when protection ceases to be just a pretty word and becomes real action. At that moment, Claire realized something terrifying. She wasn't just losing the benefit. She was being transformed from a hero's widow into a criminal, from a devoted mother into a fraudster, from a citizen deserving of dignity into a target of institutional persecution. And there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. For the next 3 days, Claire tried everything. She called every number she could find related to the Veterans Assistance Department. She was transferred, put on hold, hung up on. When she finally managed to speak to supervisors, the response was always the same. Case under investigation. We cannot discuss. She tried to schedule an in-person meeting. It was denied. She tried to access the research documents through a formal request. Denied under the pretext of ongoing investigative confidentiality. It was Kafkaesque. She was being judged, condemned, destroyed. She didn't even have the right to know what she was accused of, nor to see the evidence, nor to defend herself. Claire then tried veterans support organizations, the same organizations that had shown up at James's funeral with flowers, beautiful speeches about sacrifice and eternal gratitude. She called them all, left messages explaining the situation. Only one returned her call, and the response was devastating. Unfortunately, Ms. Hamilton, we cannot get involved in cases where there is an allegation of fraud. This would damage the organization's reputation. We hope you understand. Claire understood perfectly. She had become toxic, radioactive. Nobody wanted to be associated with her because association could mean contamination. The other military widows in the support group, those with whom Claire had cried, shared stories, and found some comfort in the impossible first months after James's death began to avoid her. They didn't answer messages. They canceled meetings. One of them was finally honest enough to tell the truth. Claire, I'm so sorry. But if you're being investigated, and I'm still close to you, they might start investigating me too. I can't risk it. I have 3 children. Do you understand? Claire understood. Of course, she understood. But understanding didn't make it any less painful. And then it started in the neighborhood. Stares, whispers. People who used to greet her now crossed the street. The mother of Emma's schoolmate asked, with feigned concern, "Is it true that you're in trouble with the law? Because I need to think about my daughter's safety, you know?" As if financial fraud were contagious. As if Claire were a danger to other people's children. Emma came home crying because another child had said that her mother was a thief. Sophie, younger, didn't fully understand yet, but she felt it. She felt the tension, the fear, the shame that Claire tried to hide but that leaked out in every gesture, every word, every prolonged silence. If something like this has ever happened to you, if you've ever been judged without the right to a defense, if you've ever felt the world turn its back on you based on rumor or unsubstantiated accusation, share in the comments. Because Claire is not alone in this experience, and neither are you. At night, after putting the girls to bed, after reading stories, giving goodnight kisses, pretending everything would be all right, even without knowing if it would. Claire would sit alone in the dark room and try to do impossible calculations. I had enough savings for 2 months' rent. Maybe 3 if she cut absolutely everything that wasn't essential. After that, eviction. And then what? Shelter. Sharing a cheap hotel room with her 2 daughters. Going back to her parents who could barely support themselves and who had already made it clear that they always knew she wasn't good enough for James. She thought about looking for a job, but doing what? She had dropped out of college when she got pregnant with Emma. She had spent the last decade as a military wife, a full-time mother, moving from city to city as James was transferred. She had no degree, no recent work experience, no references. And now, on top of everything, she had a fraud charge on her record. Who would hire someone like that? For what kind of work? And even if she got something minimum wage, part-time, who would take care of the girls while she worked? Daycare cost almost as much as she could earn. The options were disappearing one by one. And in their place grew something far more terrifying: despair. The kind of despair that makes a person consider things they would never otherwise consider. Claire found herself looking at the jewelry James had given her. A simple engagement ring, anniversary earrings, her last physical connection with him. How much would they be worth at a pawn shop? Enough for another month, 2. And then she hated herself for thinking about it, for considering selling memories, because the system had decided to destroy her. One night, Emma entered the room and found Claire crying. The little girl, so small but already carrying a weight a child shouldn't carry, sat beside her mother and held her hand. "Mommy, will we be okay?" Claire wanted to say yes. She wanted to promise, but she was too tired of lying. "I don't know, my love, but I will fight. I will fight with everything I have." Emma nodded, too serious for her age. Daddy would fight too, and that broke something in Claire. Because James had fought. He had literally given everything. And now his widow and daughters were being punished. For what? For existing, for needing help, for trusting that the system would honor the promises it made. If this part touched you, if you felt the injustice of it, the cruelty of turning the victim into the villain, leave a like below. Because stories like this need to be told. People like this need to be seen. Claire didn't know it yet, but while she was sinking into that nightmare, someone was paying attention. Not with superficial pity or morbid curiosity, but with that real attention that recognizes injustice when it's seen. Someone who had resources, authority, and, most importantly, a conscience that wouldn't allow them to turn their back. Someone who would look at her situation and ask the question no one else was asking. Wait, does this really make sense? Or is something very wrong happening here? Sheriff Ben Carter had heard about Claire Hamilton through the town's grapevine. Gossip about the veteran's widow being investigated for fraud. Most people repeated it with that tone of disguised moral satisfaction, that secret pleasure of seeing someone fall, of confirming that everyone has dirty secrets. But Ben had too much experience, had seen too much injustice, to accept ready-made narratives without questioning. So he started paying attention. He started asking discreet questions. He started pulling threads that no one else was pulling. And the more he investigated, the more something didn't add up. Claire Hamilton had no history of anything suspicious. No strange debts. No extravagant spending. No hidden sources of income. She lived modestly, almost, in poverty, on the benefits she was legally entitled to. So why had someone decided she was a fraudster? Where had this accusation come from? And why was the system being so aggressive in pursuing her without presenting concrete evidence? If you want to follow the rest of this story and find out what Ben discovered when he really started investigating, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because what's coming next will show that sometimes the real criminal isn't the one being accused. Ben knew he was treading on territory that technically wasn't his. Federal benefits fraud wasn't the jurisdiction of a small-town sheriff. But he also knew that if he did nothing, if no one looked deeper, Claire would be destroyed. and her daughters would grow up believing their mother was a criminal. They would carry that shame, that mark, for the rest of their lives. He couldn't let that happen, not when every instinct of his screamed that there was something profoundly wrong with the official story. So Ben made a decision. He was going to investigate. Not officially, not with paperwork and formal procedures that would alert the wrong people, but he was going to investigate. He was going to find out the truth. And if the truth proved what he suspected, that Claire was a victim, not a criminal, then he was going to do everything in his power to protect her, even if it cost him something, even if it was complicated. Because some battles you choose, not because they are easy or strategic, but because they are the right ones. And this was one of them. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because to understand what was happening to Claire, you need to understand who she was before everything fell apart, before the accusation, before the system turned against her, before she became a target. Claire Hamilton was 32 years old and had already lived too many lives. She wasn't a woman who sought drama or complication. Quite the opposite. She was the kind of person who does everything right, who follows the rules, who believes that if you work hard and are honest, things will fall into place. But life had other plans for her. It always has. She had married James at 20. Too young, everyone said. But they were in love with that intense passion that only youth allows. And she was pregnant. It wasn't a careless accident. It was a choice. They wanted it. They wanted to build a family. They wanted a future together. But a future needs a foundation. And James, who had grown up poor, who knew the weight of not having enough, made a decision that would change everything. He joined the army. It was the only way to guarantee a stable salary, medical benefits, and a future education for his children. It was a calculated sacrifice. He would serve, she would wait. And eventually, they would have a good life, a secure one. But waiting is harder than it seems. Claire was left alone with the baby Emma. Beautiful, demanding, and completely dependent. James was deployed to a base on the other side of the country during basic training. 6 months without seeing him. Only sporadic calls and letters that arrived weeks after they were written. Claire learned to be a mother alone. She learned to change diapers. At 3 in the morning while crying from exhaustion. She learned to sing lullabies even when her voice failed her from fear and loneliness. She learned that love for a child is stronger than anything else, stronger than tiredness, doubt, and despair. When James finally returned, Claire barely recognized him. He had changed, hardened. The army does that, turns boys into soldiers, and soldiers carry things they can't talk about. But they tried. They rebuilt connection. They found rhythm. And then, Sophie was born. Another girl, another reason to keep going. Another mouth to feed, and another heart to protect. The life of a military wife is nomadic by nature. Claire and James never stayed in one place for long. 2 years here, 3 there. Always moving as he was transferred. And every time they moved, Claire started over from scratch. New neighbors, new city. No job, because how do you build a career when you know you'll have to leave in months? No support network, because friendships need time to take root. Just her, the girls, and the constant wait for the next deployment, for the next move, for the next separation. Claire managed everything. Home, bills, children, homesickness, and fear. Because every military wife lives with fear. That fear that lives in the pit of your stomach and never completely goes away. Fear of the phone call in the middle of the night. Fear of the knock on the door. Fear of the officers in formal uniform with expressions you don't want to decipher. And twice James was deployed to conflict zones, Afghanistan, Iraq, and that fear turned into a paralyzing terror that Claire had to hide from her daughters. She had to smile. She had to say, "Daddy will be back soon." She had to pretend she wasn't dying of fear every second of every day. James returned from those missions. He returned physically whole, but carrying burdens, nightmares, long silences, a distant gaze, PTSD that he refused to treat because soldiers don't go to therapy. Claire tried to help, tried to be strong for him, tried to be a safe haven when he woke up screaming. But how do you help someone who won't admit they need help? How do you save someone who is drowning but insists they are swimming? And then came the final deployment. Not a conflict zone this time, just a training base in Germany. Routine. Safe. Claire finally breathed. Finally let her shoulders relax. Finally slept a full night without terror. James was going to be okay. They were going to be okay. 10 months. Just 10 months, and he'd be back. And then they would finally settle down. James had promised. One more deployment, and he'd request a transfer to administrative work. Something stable. Something that would allow them to have a normal life. The girls to have a consistent schooling. Claire maybe go back to school, have her own career, be something more than soldier's wife. The news arrived on a Tuesday, 2 years ago. Claire remembered every detail of that day with painful clarity. The sky was blue. The girls were playing in the yard. She was preparing lunch, and then the doorbell rang. She knew. The second she heard that sound, she knew. Because military wives always know. It's a terrible intuition you develop. She opened the door and saw them. 2 officers in formal uniform. Practiced expressions of professional compassion. And the words she had prayed never to hear. Mrs. Hamilton, we regret to inform you. James had died. Not in combat, not defending anyone, not doing anything. Heroic. An accident during training. Defective equipment. A protocol error. A stupid death. Bureaucratic. Meaningless. He had survived war zones. He had returned from places where people genuinely tried to kill him. And he died at a training base because of maintenance negligence. The irony was too cruel to process. Grief was. There's no adequate word. It was like being shipwrecked. It was like disintegrating. It was waking up every day and having to remember again that he wasn't there, that he would never be there again. Claire had to be strong for the girls. She had to explain how do you explain death to 6 and 4-year-olds. She had to hold them while they cried. She had to keep making lunch, giving them baths, reading them bedtime stories. She had to keep their world functioning while hers had completely stopped. The funeral was a nightmare. Folded flag, gun salute, beautiful words about sacrifice and service. People she barely knew offering empty condolences. He was a hero. He died serving his country. Claire wanted to scream. She wanted to say no. He didn't die heroically. He died because someone didn't check the equipment properly. He died because the system failed. And now she was here, holding 2 terrified girls, trying to figure out how to survive without him. But she didn't scream. She simply accepted the flag. She thanked politely. She survived the day, and the next, and the next. Because that's what mothers do. They survive. Even when every cell in their body wants to give up, they keep going. For the children. Always for the children. The military survivor benefit was processed 6 weeks after the funeral. Claire didn't even know it existed until a veteran's social worker explained. It was her right. Recognition of James's sacrifice. It wasn't much, $1,200 a month, but it was enough. Enough to pay the rent on the small house they had rented during their last move. Enough for food, clothes, the basics. Enough so Claire wouldn't have to immediately look for a job and leave the girls with strangers while she processed her grief. Claire used those first few months just to exist, to let the girls process, to create a new routine without their father, to learn how to be a family of 3 instead of 4. It wasn't easy. Nothing was easy. Emma developed separation anxiety. She wouldn't let Claire out of her sight. Sophie stopped talking for weeks. She just stared with those big, sad eyes. Child therapy. Sleepless nights. Day after day of just trying to keep everyone together. But little by little, they began to heal. Not cure. Claire had learned that you never fully recover from such a loss, but to heal, to find a new normal. Emma smiled again. Sophie started talking again. They still asked about their father. They still cried sometimes. But they also played, they laughed, they lived. And Claire realized that this was all James would have wanted. That they would continue. That they would be happy. That they would live. Claire had vague plans to go back to school. Maybe do an online college course, get a degree, eventually work, have her own career, not be permanently dependent on government assistance. But that was the future. For now, she was just trying to keep everyone stable, trying to be a good enough mother to compensate for the father's absence, trying to make James proud, wherever he was. And then came that letter, that accusation, and everything Claire had rebuilt thought that fragile. Stability, all that carefully established routine, all that hope for a decent future crumbled again. Because the system that was supposed to protect her, that had promised not to abandon veterans' families, had decided she was the enemy. It had decided she didn't deserve dignity. It had decided to destroy her. And Claire, who had already lost so much, who had already survived so much, realized that perhaps this time, she wouldn't be able to survive, because you can rebuild after tragedy. But how? Do you rebuild when it's the system itself that's tearing you down? How do you fight when the adversary is the entire government? How do you win when you've already started defeated? Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because what happened to Claire in the days and weeks following that letter wasn't just frustrating bureaucracy or a slow system. It was systemic abandonment. It was betrayal by every institution, every person, every safety net that should exist precisely for moments like this. And it was a brutal revelation of a truth Claire had never wanted to believe, that when you really need help, when you're most vulnerable, that's exactly when the world decides you don't deserve anything anymore. The system that was supposed to protect military widows was the first to turn its back on them. Claire had believed the promises. She had believed the beautiful speeches at James's funeral about how we take care of our own and veteran families are never abandoned. But apparently, those were just words. Because when she really tried to understand what was happening, it was like repeatedly banging her head against a concrete wall until her hands bled. She tried to schedule an in-person meeting with the benefits department supervisor. She called 5 times. She left detailed messages explaining the situation, pleading for a chance to clear up the misunderstanding. On the 6th call, someone finally answered. Ms. Hamilton, cases under active investigation are not entitled to a preliminary hearing. This is clearly stated in the protocol. Claire tried to keep her voice calm, even though her heart was racing. But I need to know what I'm being accused of. I need to see the evidence. How can I defend myself if I don't know what I'm being accused of? The voice on the other end grew even colder. The evidence is part of a confidential investigation. You will be notified when the process is complete. When will that be? It could take from 6 months to 2 years, depending on the complexity of the case. 2 years. Claire hung up the phone and just sat there, processing. 2 years without benefits. 2 years under suspicion. 2 years with this shadow hanging over her while she tried to rebuild her life. How does someone survive 2 years without income? How does she explain to her daughters why they are losing their home, why they don't have enough food, why everything is falling apart again? She tried another approach. She formally requested access to the investigation documents through the Freedom of Information Act. She filled out forms. She waited. The response came 3 weeks later, denied. Active investigation documents are exempt from disclosure under Section 552(b)(7)(a). Records compiled for law enforcement purposes that could reasonably interfere with law enforcement proceedings. It was Kafkaesque. She was being judged and condemned without seeing the evidence against her, without knowing specifically what she was accused of, without a chance to defend herself. And this was perfectly legal. The system had been designed precisely to allow this. Claire then turned to organizations that had promised support. The Veterans Association that had appeared at the funeral with flowers and emotional speeches. She called, left messages, sent emails. Nothing. Complete silence. After 2 weeks of trying, she finally managed to speak to someone. "Hello, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I need help." "My benefit was," the voice interrupted her. "Yes, Mrs. Hamilton, we saw your messages. Unfortunately, our organization cannot get involved in cases where there are allegations of misconduct or fraud. This would harm our reputation and ability to help other veterans and their families. We hope you understand. Good luck." Click. Claire stared at the phone, incredulous. Those same people who had held her hand at the funeral, who had promised she would never be alone, who had given her cards with emergency numbers and said, "Call anytime." Now they didn't even want to talk to her, because she had become toxic, radioactive. Association with her could tarnish their reputation, and reputation mattered more than honoring promises. The Veterans Department social worker Janet, a 50-year-old woman who had been so solicitous in the first months after James's death, who had helped Claire navigate paperwork, who had cried with her when benefits processing was finally approved now, spoke to her as if she were an inconvenient stranger. Claire had run into her by chance at the post office. "Janet, thank God I've been trying to call you. Can you help me understand what's going on? Please?" Janet looked around nervously, as if being near Claire were a crime. "I can't discuss active cases. You need to follow official procedure. But you know me. You know I wouldn't do anything wrong." Janet physically recoiled. "Claire, I'm sorry, but I can't get involved. My job. I can't risk it." And she left. Simply turned and walked away, leaving Claire standing there in the middle of the post office, clutching envelopes with trembling hands. The support group for military widows was perhaps the most painful betrayal. Those women had become something akin to family in the 2 years since James's death. They understood the loss, the loneliness, the fear, the impossible process of continuing to live when part of you is dead. Claire had cried with them, had shared stories, had found comfort in not being completely alone in her grief. But now, the messages in the WhatsApp group stopped including her. The monthly meetings she wasn't officially uninvited from, she just stopped receiving information about when and where they happened. She tried calling Teresa, the informal leader of the group, someone Claire considered a true friend. "Teresa, what's going on? Why isn't anyone talking to me anymore?" Teresa sighed heavily. "Claire, look, it's complicated. Some of the women are worried. If you're being investigated, and we remain close, maybe they'll start investigating us too. And none of us can risk losing the benefits. You understand, right?" Claire understood intellectually, but emotionally, it hurt in a way she didn't know was possible. "So you're just cutting me off like that? It's not personal, it's survival. When this is resolved, when you're exonerated, we'll talk again. But, for now, it's better this way," and the line died. Survival, always survival. Everyone protecting their own skin, and Claire being sacrificed in the process. She then realized a brutal truth. Solidarity only exists when it costs nothing. When it demands risk, discomfort, the possibility of contamination, people disappear. It doesn't matter how close you were. It doesn't matter how many tears you shared. In the end, it's every man for himself. Her family was almost worse because it should have been. Different families should be unconditional. They should believe in you even when everyone else doubts you. But when Claire called her parents asking for help, not financial, just emotional, just someone who believed in her, the response was devastating. Her mother answered after Claire explained everything. "Well, Claire, are you sure you filled out all the forms correctly? You know you've never been very good with paperwork. Remember when you lost that scholarship because you forgot to send a document?" Claire was speechless. "Mom, I didn't forget to send anything. I didn't do anything wrong." Her mother sighed. "I know you don't think you did, but sometimes we make mistakes without realizing it. Maybe you should just admit the mistake, pay back what you owe, and move on." "I don't owe anything. I didn't do anything. Silence on the other end. Then, no need to yell, Claire. I'm just trying to help. But she wasn't. She was doubting, just like everyone else. Her father was more direct. Claire, you've always had a tendency to complicate things. Ever since you were little. Always drama. Always a crisis. And honestly, we always thought James was too good for you. So if you did something to lose the benefit, well, maybe it's a natural consequence of your choices. Claire hung up without answering. She cried for an hour and realized she was completely alone. Not even her family believed her. And then it began in the neighborhood. The transformation was gradual, but relentless. People who used to greet her now crossed the street when they saw her. The elderly lady next door, who used to give cookies to the girls, stopped. She would only close her curtains when she saw Claire. The couple across the street with whom Claire had shared dinners, barbecues, normal neighborly conversations, began to ostentatiously avoid her. Claire heard her wife whispering loud enough to be heard, I don't want my children near hers. You never know what kind of values she's teaching. The mothers at school were worse. There was an incident. Emma came home crying. Sophia's mother won't let her play with me anymore. She said, you're a thief. Claire felt anger boiling over. She went to the school the next day and found Sophia's mother. I need to talk to you. The woman looked at her with barely disguised disdain. I have nothing to say to you. You told your daughter I'm a thief. I said, you're under investigation for fraud, which is different, but practically the same thing. And yes, I told my daughter not to associate with yours. I need to protect my son from negative influences. Claire wanted to scream. She wanted to say that it was absurd, cruel, unfair, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. The woman had already decided. Everyone had already decided. Claire was guilty. End of story. Sophie, the younger one, didn't fully understand, but she felt it. One night she asked, Mommy, why don't people like us anymore? Claire had no answer. How do you explain systemic cruelty to a 6-year-old? How do you tell her that the world is sometimes unfair, that people are cowardly, and that you can do everything right and still be punished? So Claire just held her. Sometimes people don't understand, but we know the truth, and that's what matters. But did it matter? Does truth matter when nobody believes it? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because while Claire was being systematically destroyed by every person and institution around her, there was someone paying attention, not with morbid curiosity or disguised moral satisfaction, but with the kind of attention that recognizes injustice when it sees it. The kind of attention that doesn't accept ready-made narratives without questioning. The kind of attention that transforms observer into ally. And that someone was Sheriff Ben Carter. Ben had 18 years of experience in law enforcement. He had started as a patrolman in a larger city, had seen the worst of humanity, domestic violence, child abuse, crimes that robbed him of sleepless nights, and faith in human goodness. He had developed the thick skin that police officers need to survive emotionally. But he had also developed something rarer, a sharp instinct for injustice. To know when something was wrong, even when everyone pretended it was right. And everything about Claire Hamilton's situation screamed wrong. He knew her by sight. Impossible not to recognize her in a town of 12,000 inhabitants, where the same faces circulate in the same places. He had seen her at Memorial Day ceremonies for the past 2 years, always sitting in the front row with her 2 daughters, listening to speeches about sacrifice and gratitude, holding a folded flag she had received at her husband's funeral. He remembered her posture, straight back, head held high, trying to be strong for the girls, who clearly didn't fully understand why they were there, but felt the weight of the moment. Ben had also seen her in other places, at the supermarket, carefully calculating each item before putting it in the cart, at the public library, where she took her daughters every Saturday to borrow books because books were free and entertainment was a luxury she couldn't afford. At school, where she always showed up for parent-teacher meetings, always asked how her daughters were doing, always profusely thanked teachers as if basic attention were an extraordinary favor. It was the behavior of someone who knew the value of things, of someone who lived on the edge but with dignity, not of a criminal, not of a fraudster. So when Ben started hearing the whispers, veteran widow being investigated for fraud, something didn't add up. The story didn't make sense. Claire Hamilton, living beyond her means. The woman he'd seen buying rice in bulk and generic versions because that was all she could afford. The woman whose daughters wore clothes, clearly passed down through generations. No, something was profoundly wrong. Ben had a keen instinct for lies. 18 years of interrogating suspects teach you to read microexpressions, inconsistencies, signs of fabrication. And he had an equally keen instinct for truth. To recognize when someone is being honest, even when superficial evidence suggests otherwise. All his instincts screamed that Claire was a victim, not a perpetrator. But instinct wasn't evidence. So Ben did what he knew how to do. He investigated. He started quietly. He couldn't officially investigate federal benefits. Fraud wasn't within the jurisdiction of a municipal sheriff. But he could ask questions. He could use connections. He could pull wires. He called the Regional Veterans Assistance Office. He identified himself. He used the casual but authoritative tone that comes naturally after 2 decades in uniform. "I'm calling about Claire Hamilton's case. What specific evidence is there against her?" The response was evasive from the start. "Sheriff Carter, I appreciate your interest, but we can't discuss active cases," Ben insisted. "I understand protocol, but I need some basic context. My jurisdiction, potential criminal overlap, just a general outline." Pause. Typing sound. Sigh. "All right. Financial discrepancies have been reported." "What kind of discrepancies?" "I can't go into specific details." "Try." He put pressure on his voice, not threatening, but firm. The kind of firmness that makes a bureaucrat decide it's easier to cooperate than to resist. Another pause. "Then, we received an anonymous complaint. Someone reported that Mrs. Hamilton was living beyond her means. She was seen making expensive purchases. She was seen driving a car that she apparently couldn't afford with her benefits alone. It indicated an undeclared source of income, which would violate the terms of the benefit." Ben frowned. "Expensive purchases? Where? What car? I don't have those details in front of me. And you investigated these allegations before?" "Cutting off benefits. We initiated a standard investigation." "What does that mean?" "We reviewed available financial records. And what did you find?" Silence. "Still analyzing." "So you cut off widows' benefits with 2 daughters based on an unverified anonymous complaint." "We follow protocol when there is credible suspicion. An anonymous complaint without concrete evidence is credible suspicion." Ben couldn't hide his disbelief. The voice on the other end became defensive. "Protocol exists for a reason, Sheriff. Benefit fraud is a serious problem, I agree. But destroying the life of an innocent person is too." "Who made the complaint?" "It's anonymous." "Anonymous or confidential?" "Anonymous. So anyone can call, make unsubstantiated accusations, and ruin someone's life. We investigate all complaints, but they cut off benefits first and ask questions later. It's standard procedure when there is, I see, credible suspicion." "I understand." Ben hung up more frustrated. Then when he called, he didn't stop. He called 3 more people in related departments. They all gave variations of the same story. Anonymous complaint. Living above the law. Investigation underway. None had concrete details. None had actually verified allegations before acting. It was bureaucracy on autopilot. Someone accuses, you sue. You don't question much because questioning is hard work and following protocol is easier. Ben decided to investigate on his own. He discreetly checked financial records. He had legal access to public taxes, property records, that sort of thing. Claire owned nothing. She rented a small house. She hadn't had a car registered in her name since the previous year. She had no significant debt switch. Made sense because you can't get credit when your only income is a modest government benefit. She had no bank accounts beyond a basic checking account. She had no investments. She had nothing to indicate hidden income or a luxurious lifestyle. He chatted casually with people who knew her. The librarian, Claire Hamilton. Oh yes, she always comes with her daughters. Lovely woman, always grateful. The girls are well behaved. Why? Just asking. Would you know if she has a job? Not that I know of. I think she lives on veterans' benefits. Sad situation, that losing her husband so young. The supermarket manager. Claire, of course, regular customer. Always polite. Always pays in cash or debit. Never a problem. Does she buy expensive items? Luxuries. The manager laughed. Sheriff. She buys rice, beans, discounted chicken. Nothing fancy. Why? Ben was putting the pieces together, and the picture showed exactly what he suspected. Claire Hamilton lived modestly, carefully, without extravagance. So where had the accusation of living beyond her means come from? He dug deeper. He discovered through a secretary at the Veterans Office a woman he knew, who owed him a favor, that the accusation had come from a phone call. Anonymous. Female voice. She said she'd seen Claire Hamilton shopping at an expensive department store, buying designer clothes. Said Claire drove a new car. Said she clearly had undeclared income because veteran benefits wouldn't cover that lifestyle. Ben investigated further. The expensive department store. Claire had been seen there once, the day after Christmas, in the clearance section. Ben confirmed with a clerk that he remembered her because Claire had spent 40 minutes choosing 2 dresses for her daughters, checking prices multiple times, and finally buying the cheapest ones on sale at 70% off. Total, $16. Was that expensive shopping? The new car? Ben tracked that down too. Claire had been seen once in a relatively new Honda Accord, except it wasn't hers. It was borrowed from Teresa, from the widows group. The day Claire's car had finally broken down and she needed to take Sophie to the doctor. Teresa confirmed this when Ben asked. So the entire accusation was based on nothing. Superficial observations, misinterpreted, or worse, maliciously distorted. Someone had seen Claire existing buying clothes on sale, driving a borrowed car and had decided to turn that into evidence of a crime. And the system had believed it. Had acted, had destroyed her life without verifying anything. Ben felt anger rising. Not explosive, unproductive anger, but a cold, focused anger that made him good at his job. Anger that comes from witnessing blatant injustice and having the power to do something about it. This wasn't justice. It was persecution. It was bureaucratic cruelty. And he wasn't going to stand by and watch. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because the moment Ben and Claire truly connected wasn't planned. It wasn't in a formal office or police station setting. It was in a supermarket parking lot on a gray Thursday afternoon, 3 days after her benefits were cut off. And sometimes the most important moments in life happen exactly like that, to unannounced, unprepared, they just happen. Ben was returning from routine patrol when he saw her car. An old, battered sedan with a faded military pride sticker on the bumper. He knew that car. He'd seen Claire driving it dozens of times. And something about the way it was parked slightly crooked, as if she'd stopped in a hurry, made him slow down. He looked closer, and he saw her. Claire sat in the driver's seat, her forehead resting on the steering wheel, her shoulders hunched forward in a posture of utter defeat. Ben could see she was trying not to cry, trying to hold back. And in the back seat, 2 little girls sat too quietly. That kind of artificial silence children develop when they know their mother is at her limit. When they know that one wrong move, one wrong word, could make everything crumble. Emma, the older one, held her younger sister's hand. Both looked at their mother with a concern that children shouldn't have to. Feel. Ben parked the patrol car. He hadn't planned it. He just acted on instinct. He got out. He walked to her car. He gently knocked on the window. Claire looked up abruptly, startled. She wiped her face quickly with the back of her hand, trying to erase any evidence of tears. She opened the window with an expression that mixed shame and fear. "Sheriff Carter, is there a problem?" Her voice tried to sound normal, controlled, but it failed. There was a crack in it. The sound of someone holding broken glass, trying not to cut themselves. Ben looked at her, then at the worried eyes of the girls in the back seat, then back at Claire, and he really saw, not an abstract widow, not a statistic, but a person. A woman on the absolute edge, trying to maintain composure for the sake of her children. And something inside him, that part that had joined the police force, because it believed in protecting people, decided, "Can I speak with you for a minute? In private?" Claire hesitated. For a second, it seemed she was going to refuse. But then she looked at her daughters, forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said, "Girls, Mommy will be right back. Stay here." She got out of the car, closed the door gently, and stood there, in the middle of the parking lot, arms crossed defensively over her chest, waiting for the next blow. Because that's what she had learned to expect. Blows. Always more blows. They stood between the parked cars. A cold, late afternoon wind made Claire shiver in her coat, which was too thin for the temperature. Ben noticed. He also noticed her red eyes, her hands trembling slightly. The way she was too thin, too angular, signs of someone who had been skipping meals. "I heard about the benefit," Ben began, straightforward, no beating around the bush. Claire stiffened immediately. Her whole body tensed, bracing for attack. "And you came to arrest me." There was bitterness in her voice, weariness, suppressed anger. "So I came to turn myself in, to save everyone's time." Ben shook his head slowly. "No, Mrs. Hamilton. I came because I think something is wrong here. Very wrong. And I want to help." Claire looked at him with an expression that shattered something inside him. It was a devastating mix of deep distrust and even deeper despair. As if part of her wanted to believe, but another part, the part that had been hurt too much, couldn't anymore. "Why?" Her voice came out broken. "Why do you care? Nobody else cares. Nobody believes me. Why would you be any different?" Ben held her gaze. He didn't look away. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply spoke the truth. "Because I know injustice when I see it. 18 years in this job teach you to recognize it. And this is injustice. Pure and simple." He paused. "And because I investigated, informally, and nothing about your situation indicates fraud. It indicates exactly the opposite. It indicates someone living honestly, carefully, trying to do the best they can with what they have." Something broke inside Claire at that moment. The last barrier, the last defense. She had held it together for so many days. She had been strong for the girls. She had kept up the mask that everything would be all right. But hearing those words, "I believe in you," from someone, anyone, especially someone with authority, with power, was too much. The tears she had been holding back began to fall. Not dramatic crying, just silent tears streaming down her face as she stood there, trembling, trying to stay on her feet. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. Her voice was small, broken, heavy with the weight of having to repeat it 1,000 times without anyone believing her. "I swear, I don't even know what I'm being accused of. They won't tell me. They just cut everything off. And now I don't know how I'm going to pay the rent. I don't know how I'm going to feed my daughters. I don't know what to do." The words flowed out, months of fear and frustration, despair finally finding an escape. Ben didn't try to fix her. He didn't offer immediate solutions. He didn't downplay it. He just stood there, a solid presence. He let her release what she needed to release. And when she finally stopped talking, when she was just there with a wet face and trembling body, he said, "I believe in you, and I'm going to help." I don't know exactly how yet, but I'm going to find out what's really going on. And I'm going to fix it. Claire looked at him through her tears, wanting to believe, but afraid of hope. Because hope hurts when it's crushed. How? You're a municipal sheriff. This is federal. You don't have jurisdiction. Ben gave a small smile. Technically, no. But I have resources. I have connections. And I have something more important. The will to do what's right, even when it's not convenient. Claire wiped her face with a trembling hand. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Ben considered the question. Then he answered honestly. Because I lost my wife 7 years ago. Cancer. And in the months after she died, when I was thinking, it was small acts of kindness from strangers that kept me alive. People who owed me nothing but chose to help anyway. And I promised myself that when I had the opportunity, I would do the same. I would pass kindness on. He paused. And because your husband served his country, and you're being punished by a system that should protect you, that's wrong. And I can't stand by and watch wrongdoing happen when I can do something about it. They stayed there for a few more minutes. Ben let Claire compose herself. He didn't pressure her. He didn't rush her. He just stood there, a silent guardian, while she took a deep breath, wiped her face, and reconstructed the mask she wore for her daughters. I need to go back, she finally said. The girls are waiting. Ben nodded. Before you go, my number. He took a card from his pocket. He wrote his personal number on the back. Cell phone. Call. Anytime, day or night. If you need anything. If you have information. Or if you just need someone who believes in you. Okay? Claire took the card, her hands still trembling. She looked at it, then at the number. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what else to say besides thank you. You don't need to say anything more, Ben replied. Just don't give up. Not yet. Give me time to investigate this properly, to find the truth. Promise. Claire hesitated, then nodded. I promise. When Claire returned to the car, Ben saw the girls immediately surround her with questions. He saw her force a smile, touch their faces tenderly, gently lie that everything was fine, and then she drove away. Ben stood there in the parking lot, watching the old car disappear into the gray afternoon. And he made a decision. He wasn't just going to ask casual questions. He was going to investigate this properly. He was going to find out not only if Claire was innocent, he already knew she was, but who had made the false accusation, why, and if there was something bigger going on behind the scenes, because his instinct told him this wasn't an isolated mistake, an anonymous complaint based on nothing, the system acting without verification, benefits cut without due process. It seemed systematic, planned, as if someone knew exactly how to manipulate bureaucracy to destroy someone. And if it was happening to Claire, it could be happening to others, other widows, other veterans, other vulnerable people the system should have protected but was preying on. Ben returned to the patrol car with a newfound sense of purpose. It wasn't just about helping a woman in need anymore. It was about exposing potential corruption, about protecting not only Claire, but everyone who could be a future victim. And if it cost him something, so be it. Some battles are worth more than personal safety. Now I want to delve even deeper into this matter, because what Ben discovered in the weeks following that encounter in the parking lot was far, far worse than bureaucratic error or administrative negligence. It was something calculated. It was something systematic. It was corruption in its most cruel form, stealing from people who had already lost everything. And the more Ben dug, the more the hidden truth revealed itself as something that went beyond Claire, beyond an isolated case, and entered the territory of a conspiracy involving people with real power. Ben picked up where he'd left off, the anonymous tip. He knew that nothing is truly anonymous if you know where to look and have the right resources. He used contacts he'd built up over 18 years. He called a friend who worked in telecommunications. I need to trace the call. I have the date and time, the number of the office that received it. Can you do it? The friend hesitated. Ben, this is... Technically, I shouldn't. I know. But it's important. Really important. Trust me. Long pause. Send me the details. It took 3 days. But Ben managed it. The call had come from an internal number. From the Veterans Assistance Office itself. It wasn't external. It was internal. Someone on the inside had made an anonymous complaint against Claire. Ben felt a chill run down his spine. Why would an employee report a beneficiary internally, but pretend it was an anonymous external call? The only reason was to hide their identity, to hide their connection. Ben obtained the office's phone records. He traced the specific extension from which the call was made. It belonged to Margaret Oakes, a mid-level employee who had worked there for 12 years, responsible for processing benefits reviews. Ben wrote down the name. Then he began digging into her professional life. What he found was pattern. In the last 2 years, Margaret had been directly responsible for canceling benefits for 8 different military widows. Claire was just the latest. Ben obtained names through a request that was technically beyond his authority, but a friend in the regional office was disturbed enough by his findings to violate protocol. Ben reviewed each case. They all had disturbing similarities. All the complaints were anonymous. All alleged living beyond their means. None had concrete evidence. In every case, benefits were cut off immediately. In every case, the investigation took months. And then, eventually, benefits were reinstated, but not in full. Always with an adjustment. Reassessment. Discovered an error in the original calculation. The correct amount is lower. And the widows, desperate to have any income back, accepted. They signed documents. They were grateful to have something instead of nothing. Ben did some basic math. First widow, original benefit of $1,200, returned as $900. Difference, $300 per month. Second widow, $1,100, returned as $800. Difference, $300. Third, fourth, fifth, all had reductions between $250 and $400 per month, multiplied by 8 widows, multiplied by months from cancellation to adjustment, multiplied by time since then. Ben took the numbers to a forensic accountant he knew, Michael Reeves, a former FBI agent who now worked as a private consultant. They had worked together on a money laundering case years ago. Ben trusted him completely. Michael, I need you to look at this. Tell me what you see. He spread documents on the table. Benefit records, cancellation dates, original amounts, adjusted amounts. Michael studied everything for hours. He took notes. He built spreadsheets. Ben waited anxiously. When Michael finally looked up, his expression was grim. Ben, you've stumbled upon something big. Someone is systematically diverting federal funds, small amounts from multiple beneficiaries, added up over 2 years. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe close to $500,000. Ben felt anger and validation simultaneously. He was right. Claire was innocent, but there was also something much worse happening. How does it work? Michael leaned back. It's clever, cruel, but clever. You identify vulnerable beneficiaries without family, without resources, without a voice. You fabricate a complaint that forces cancellation. The bureaucratic system does the rest. It takes months to process. The person becomes desperate. Then you offer a resolution. The benefit returns, but adjusted. The victim is so relieved to have something that they don't question it. They sign everything. And the difference? It goes somewhere. Where? That I can't say just by looking at numbers. But someone is redirecting these funds. Phantom accounts, intermediaries, eventually, someone's pockets. Ben ran his hands through his hair, processing. Margaret Oakes is a mid-level employee. She doesn't have the access to do this alone. There has to be someone above her. Someone with more authority. Michael nodded. Absolutely. She's a cog in the machine, not the architect. There's probably a supervisor or director involved. Maybe accounting. It's an operation that requires multiple points of access. Ben returned to the investigation with renewed focus. He looked at the office structure. Margaret's direct supervisor, Daniel Reese, in the position for 5 years. Ben investigated his life. Salary of $60,000 a year. But he drove a new BMW, lived in a house worth $300,000, owned a boat, traveled to Europe every year. It didn't add up, unless he had undeclared additional income. Ben dug deeper. He found property records under slightly different names. Daniel M. Reese owned 3 rental properties, purchased within the last 2 years, always in cash or with a substantial down payment. Where did the money come from? Ben didn't have access to complete bank records that required a warrant he couldn't obtain without officially involving the prosecutor's office, but he had enough to see a pattern. He decided he needed to tell Claire. She deserved to know. Not just that she was innocent, she already knew that, but that what was happening to her was part of something bigger, that she wasn't alone. That there had been victims before her, and that more would likely come if no one stopped it. Ben went to her house one night. He knocked on the door. Claire answered, surprised. "Sheriff Carter." "Did something happen?" Ben looked over her shoulder and saw the girls watching TV. "Can we talk? It's important." Claire nodded nervously. They went out onto the small porch. The night air was cold. Claire pulled her cardigan around her body. "I've discovered something," Ben began. "About your case. About why you were targeted." He told her everything. The internal whistleblowing, disguised as external. Margaret Oakes. The pattern of 8 widows. The adjusted benefits. The disappearing money. The possible large-scale fraud. Claire grew paler as she listened. When he finished, she remained silent for a long time, processing. "So, I never did anything wrong." Her voice was small, incredulous, as if she still couldn't believe it. "You never did anything wrong," Ben confirmed. "You were targeted, chosen because you seemed vulnerable, because they thought you wouldn't fight back, that you would eventually accept any crumb they offered." Claire felt tears welling in her eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of anger. "They destroyed my life. My reputation. They scared my daughters. They made me question my sanity. And all for what? Money." Ben nodded grimly. "Money stolen from people who have already lost everything. It's the lowest kind of crime." Claire wiped her face angrily. "What do we do? How do we stop this?" Ben hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. I don't have official jurisdiction. This is federal. And the people involved have connections. Daniel Reese, Margaret's supervisor. He's the councilman's cousin. He plays golf with the local judge. If I go in officially, without concrete evidence, they'll bury everything. They'll destroy records. They'll accuse me of harassment or abuse of power. So what can we do?" Claire was frustrated, desperate. Ben thought, "We need more evidence. Something indisputable. And then we need to take it to someone outside the local system. The FBI, the federal prosecutor's office. People who don't owe anyone favors here." Claire looked at him. "This is going to get you into trouble, isn't it? Investigating this. Using resources you technically shouldn't." Ben wasn't lying. Probably yes. Then why continue? Why risk it? Ben held her gaze. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because if I don't, they'll do it to the next person. And the next. And nobody will stop them. Someone needs to." Claire felt a pang in her chest. Not just gratitude. Something deeper. "Thank you. For believing in me when nobody else did. For fighting when you didn't need to." Ben smiled slightly. "We all need someone fighting for us sometimes. And now it's me for you." Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because the moral dilemma Ben faced in the days following that conversation with Claire was the kind of internal conflict that defines a man's character. It wasn't about choosing between right and wrong, that was obvious. It was about choosing between doing the right thing safely or doing the right thing in a way that could cost everything. And Ben discovered that safety and justice don't always go hand in hand. In fact, they rarely do. He was treading on dangerous ground. Investigating potential corruption in a federal agency wasn't just outside his jurisdiction, it was potentially illegal if done the wrong way. Every call he made, every record he accessed, every favor he called, technically violated some protocol. They weren't serious violations, they weren't crimes, but they were enough to build a misconduct case against him if anyone wanted to. And the people he was investigating, they certainly would want to. Ben had discovered more behind the scenes. Margaret Oakes wasn't just a corrupt official. She was married to Thomas Oakes, a city councilman, an influential man with connections at the state level, a man who had helped elect judges, prosecutors, even the current mayor. Touching Margaret meant touching Thomas, and touching Thomas meant making an enemy of an entire network of powerful people who owed him favors. Daniel Reese, her supervisor, was even more connected. Cousin of the district attorney, best friend of the president of the local chamber of commerce, member of the same golf club where all the real decisions of the city were made. He had built his career not only on competence, though he was competent, but on relationships, on knowing who to meet, on doing the right favors for the right people, and those people would protect him. They would close ranks. They would do everything they could to bury any investigation before it gained traction. The web of protection was complex and well established. Ben understood this with increasing clarity as he mapped the connections. It wasn't just to corrupt officials. It was an entire system designed to protect its own, where loyalty mattered more than the law, where political connections mattered more than evidence. And Ben was an outsider in this system. Elected sheriff, yes, but not part of the inner circle. Not someone who played golf in the right places or went to the right dinners. He had always kept his distance from it, preferring to do work instead of politics. And now that distance meant he had no powerful allies. He was alone. If he pressed the issue, if he really tried to expose it, he would make enemies. Powerful enemies. The kind that could end a career. Not immediately. They were too smart for that. But slowly, systematically. Suddenly, there would be complaints against him. Accusations of misconduct. Internal investigations. His department's budget would be cut. He would lose the next election because his opponent would have unlimited funding from concerned citizens. And eventually, he would be forced to resign or fired for some technical violation they would fabricate. Ben sat in his office late at night, alone except for the hum of the old air conditioner and the flickering fluorescent light. Everyone had gone home. It was just him, papers scattered on his desk, and the weight of the decision he needed to make. He looked at the evidence he had collected, financial records, cancellation patterns, informal testimonies, numbers that didn't add up. It was enough to raise red flags. It was enough to start an official investigation. But starting an official investigation meant going through the proper channels. It meant taking it to the district attorney, who was Daniel Reese's cousin, or taking it to the FBI, which would take months to prosecute, if they prosecuted at all. The safe path was obvious. Compile everything she had, write a formal report, send it to the FBI, copy it to the Inspector General of the Department of Veterans Affairs, follow the proper chain of command, wash her hands of it, say she was part of it, and then wait. Wait while bureaucracy slowly gnawed at her. Wait while people with expensive lawyers and political connections built defenses. Wait while Claire sank deeper and deeper into despair. Because Ben knew the FBI would take months, maybe years, to actually act. They would have to confirm everything he had discovered. They would have to build a solid federal case. They would have to navigate politics. And in that time, Claire would lose her house. She would probably lose custody of her daughters because, without a stable income, social services would determine that she couldn't provide a suitable environment. The girls would grow up in the system. Or worse, they would grow up believing that their mother was a criminal who had caused her own downfall. And it wasn't just Claire. There were 7 other widows who had been victims, and probably more would come if no one stopped this now. How many vulnerable women would be destroyed while the system slowly, glacially, processed justice? How many families would be ruined while Ben followed proper protocol and protected his own career? He thought of James Hamilton, a soldier who had died serving his country. Not gloriously, but even so, he had given his life. He had made the ultimate sacrifice, and now his widow was being robbed, persecuted, destroyed by the very system James had defended. Where was the honor in that? Where was the justice in following protocol that allowed this to happen? Ben looked at the photo on the wall. A picture of himself 20 years younger, receiving a Medal of Honor for bravery. He had saved a child from a burning house. He had gone in when everyone told him not to. He had risked his own life because it was the right thing to do. And he remembered the feeling afterward, not empty pride, but a deep satisfaction of having made a real difference, of having chosen action over safety, of having been the kind of man he wanted to be. And there he was again. A decisive moment, a choice between security and action, between protocol and justice, between protecting his career or protecting the person who truly needed protection. He looked at the plaque on the wall. Serve and protect. 2 words. Simple, but loaded with meaning. Serve whom? Protect whom? The system, the powerful people, or the vulnerable people the system failed. Ben had joined the police force for a reason. Not for the salary, it wasn't great. Not for the prestige, there wasn't much of that in a small town. But because he genuinely believed he could make a difference. That he could be a barrier between the innocent and the predators. That he could be a voice for the voiceless. And for 18 years, he had maintained that belief. He had done his job honestly. He had treated people with dignity. He had tried, every day, to make a small difference. But this was different. This was no small difference. It was a choice that would define the rest of his career, perhaps the rest of his life. If he moved forward in the way he knew was necessary, quickly, aggressively, outside official channels, he would make waves. Big waves. He would upset powerful people. It would cost him. He had no illusions about that. But what if he did? Nothing. What if he took the safe path? Claire would be destroyed. And he would have to live knowing that he had chosen his own safety over doing the right thing. He would have to look in the mirror and see himself as a coward. He would have to spend the rest of his life knowing that when it really mattered, when he had a chance to make a real difference, he backed down. And Ben knew he couldn't live with that. Some men can. They can rationalize. They can sleep at night after making a pragmatic choice. But he wasn't one of those men. Ben made his decision then, not with fanfare or dramatic flair, just with the calm acceptance that there was only one path he could take and still be the kind of man he wanted to be. He was going to expose it. He was going to protect Claire, not through proper channels that would take years and probably fail, but through public exposure, media, pressure. He was going to make so much noise that the system would be forced to act quickly. It was risky. It was potentially destructive to his own career. But it was right. And in the end, doing the right thing mattered more than anything else. Ben started making connections. Investigative journalists he knew, contacts in the senator's office, civil rights lawyers with a reputation for taking impossible cases. He was going to build a coalition. He was going to create pressure from multiple angles. He was going to force exposure before powerful people could bury everything. And yes, it was going to cost him. It already was costing him. He could feel it. But he looked at the photo of Claire and her daughters, a photo she had given him. A family smiling in their happiest moment, and he knew. Some battles you don't choose based on strategy or self-preservation. You choose them based on who you are. And Ben was a man who couldn't stand by and do nothing while injustice happened, even when doing something cost everything. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened between Ben and Claire in the following weeks wasn't a movie romance where two people look at each other and immediately fall in love. It was something much slower, much more real, much deeper, precisely because it was built on a foundation of genuine trust and shared vulnerability. It was a gradual emotional connection between two people who had been broken by life and who were, without fully realizing it, beginning to mend themselves in each other's presence. Ben began showing up at Claire's house so frequently that it became routine, never predictable. He always had a professional excuse. "I need you to sign this statement. I have more questions about the case timeline. I received new information and want to verify details with you." These were legitimate justifications. He was genuinely building a case. He truly needed her cooperation. But they both knew he was staying longer than necessary. That their conversations extended beyond the professional realm. That there was something more going on besides the sheriff helping a citizen in need. He talked to the girls. At first, they were shy, wary of this big, serious man in uniform. But Ben had a way with children, something he had developed over the years with his own daughter before she grew up and went to college. He crouched down to their level. He asked them questions about school, about friends, about things they liked. Emma, the oldest, started showing him drawings. "This one is my dad. In heaven." It was a drawing by an 8-year-old girlish stick figure in uniform, surrounded by clouds and stars. Ben held the drawing carefully, as if it were a precious object. "It's beautiful. You draw very well. Your father would be proud." And he saw tears in Claire's eyes, which she tried to hide by quickly turning her face away. Sophie, the youngest, was more direct in the way only small children can be. One night she simply climbed onto the sofa next to Ben and asked, "Did you know my father?" Ben looked at Claire, who nodded in permission. "No, dear. I didn't know him personally, but I know about him. I know he was a soldier. That he served his country. He was a hero." Her eyes were wide, hopeful, needing confirmation. "Yes," Ben answered without hesitation. "He was a hero. Because he did difficult things to protect people, including you and your sister and your mother." Sophie thought about that. "Then, are you a hero too?" Ben blinked, surprised. "Me? No, you're helping my mother. That's heroic." And she simply rested her head on his arm and went back to watching TV as if that explained everything. Ben started bringing things. Little things. "I found this in a store and thought the girls might like it. Coloring books, board games. Once, a soccer ball because Emma had casually mentioned that she liked them but didn't have one. Another day, a children's science kit because Sophie had said she wanted to be a scientist when she grew up. Claire tried to refuse every time. "Ben, you're already doing too much. You don't need to buy things for them." But he insisted with that firm but gentle way of his. "Please, let me do this. It's been a long time since I've had children around. My daughter is grown up now. Just let me, okay?" And little by little, Claire stopped resisting. She began to accept not only the gifts, but his presence, his consistency. The way he showed up and stayed and didn't judge the small apartment or old furniture or simple dinners. One night, after the girls finally fell asleep following Ben's help with homework, he was surprisingly good at 3rd grade math. They sat in the small living room. Claire served tea in chipped mugs that were all she had. There was no longer any professional excuse for him to be there. The day's work was done. But neither of them wanted him to leave. So they just sat. And for the first time, Claire really talked about James. "I miss him every day," she began, her voice low, looking at the mug in her hands. The way he laughed. How he sang completely off-key in the shower. How he always made the girls laugh. How he held me at night. "I miss everything." She paused. "But I also feel anger. And I know it's wrong. I know it's not his fault. He didn't choose to die. But I feel anger anyway. Anger because he left me. Left the girls. Left us alone to deal with all this." Tears began to fall. What kind of person feels anger towards someone who died? Ben listened, without interrupting, without judging. When she finished, he said gently, "It's normal to feel angry. More than normal. It's part of grieving. Claire looked at him in surprise. It is, of course. Grief isn't linear. It's not just sadness. It's anger, guilt, denial, acceptance all mixed together, and coming back in waves you can't control. And anger at the person who died. That's one of the most common things, because they left you. Even if it wasn't their choice, the feeling is real. Claire wiped her face. How do you know all this? Ben hesitated. He took a deep breath. Because I went through it. Have you ever lost someone? She already knew the answer. He'd mentioned it before. But she was giving him space to speak if he wanted to. Ben nodded. My wife Linda. Cancer. It's been 7 years now. He looked at his own mug. It was 2 years from the diagnosis, until she passed. And in those 2 years, I watched her wither away. I watched the pain. I watched her fight. And in the end, when she finally passed, I felt relief. Not because I wanted her to die, but because the suffering was over. And then I felt guilty for feeling relief. Guilty for continuing to live when she couldn't. Guilty for laughing again, for enjoying things again, for not being in constant mourning. Something shifted in the air between them at that moment. A profound recognition. Not of two people who had gone through the same experience, they hadn't. But of two people who understood loss at a fundamental level. Who knew the weight of continuing to exist when part of you, the part that defined who you were, simply no longer exists. Who knew that specific loneliness of being a survivor. Claire reached across the coffee table. She placed her hand on his. She said nothing because there were no suitable words. Ben turned his hand, intertwined his fingers with hers, and they stayed like that for a long time. Just existing. Two wounded souls finding something akin to healing in each other's presence. The following weeks brought more moments like that. Ben began to appear not only as sheriff on a mission, but as a friend. Perhaps something more, though neither of them was ready to name it yet. He helped with practical things, fixed a leaky faucet, changed a burnt-out light bulb, helped carry heavy groceries. But he also offered companionship, conversations, presence. One rainy night, Emma had a nightmare. She woke up screaming, calling for her father. Claire calmed her down, but the girl was inconsolable, asking for things that could no longer happen. I want Daddy. I want him to come back. Ben, who was there helping Claire prepare documents for the case, heard. And when Emma finally calmed down but couldn't sleep, he offered, would you like me to read you a story? Emma, her eyes swollen and red, nodded. Ben sat on the edge of her bed, took a children's book from the shelf, and began to read in a deep, comforting voice. Halfway through the story, Emma interrupted. Are you leaving too? The question broke something in Benno, darling. I'm not leaving. Promise. I promise. And he saw Claire in the doorway, hand to her mouth, silent tears streaming down her face. Because that 8-year-old girl had just verbalized the fear Claire felt, but couldn't express. The connection between Ben and Claire deepened at a slow but inevitable pace. There was no dramatic moment where everything changed. There was no cinematic kiss or grand declaration, but there were small moments. The way their hands began to touch more frequently. How he started staying out later. How she started dressing up a little more on the days she knew he would show up. How their conversations became more personal, more intimate, more honest. One night, after the girls had gone to sleep, they were sitting on the old sofa, reviewing documents once more. Their shoulders touched. Claire was tired, her head beginning to droop. And without thinking, she rested it on his shoulder. Ben froze for a second, surprised. Then he relaxed. He put his arm around her, pulling her a little closer. Rest a little. I'll stay awake. Claire should have resisted. She should have said she was fine. But she wasn't. She was exhausted physically, emotionally, spiritually. So she just closed her eyes and, for the first time in months, felt safe enough to simply let go. She woke up an hour later, still on the sofa, the blanket over her that hadn't been there before. Ben was in the chair next to her, working on his laptop. careful not to make any noise. When he realized she was awake, he smiled. "Did you sleep well?" Claire felt a blush rise to her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize at all. You needed it. And I didn't mind staying." And for the first time since James's death, Claire felt something she had forgotten how to feel: hope. Not just hope that the case would be resolved, but hope that perhaps, eventually, she could be happy again. That perhaps she wasn't destined to be alone forever. That perhaps, with time, she and Ben could be something more than allies in the fight against injustice. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because what Ben did in the weeks following that night on the couch was a coordinated campaign that combined official investigative work with something riskier: strategic public exposure. He knew that taking everything solely to the FBI would mean months, maybe years, of slow processing while Claire continued to suffer. So he did something that technically violated protocol, but was absolutely necessary. He leaked the story. Ben had meticulously compiled evidence, documents, financial records, cancellation patterns, testimonies from the other 7 widows who had been victims. He had tracked them all and convinced each one to speak. Numbers that didn't add up. Money disappearing. The web of corruption connecting Margaret Oakes and Daniel Reese. And he had 2 copies of everything. One went to the FBI, through official channels, with a formal report and a request for a federal investigation. The other, it went to Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist at the state newspaper, who had a reputation for not being afraid of powerful people and not accepting political pressure. Ben had known Sarah for years, since she had covered a municipal corruption case he had helped expose. She was tenacious, ethical, and most importantly, she had editors who supported real investigative journalism even when it caused discomfort. He met her at a cafe an hour outside the city. He handed her a folder of evidence. "This is big, Sarah. Systematic theft from military widows. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Corrupt officials protected by political connections." Sarah flipped through the documents, her eyes wide. "Ben, do you know what this is going to cause?" "I know. That's why I'm giving it to you. You need someone who won't back down when the pressure starts." Sarah looked at him. "You're going to get in trouble for this. Probably. But I can't let this continue." She nodded. "Give me 2 weeks to check everything." It took exactly 2 weeks. Sarah did her homework. He interviewed all the widows. He verified every number. He obtained additional documents through Freedom of Information Act requests. He confronted Margaret Oakes and Daniel Reese. Both refused to comment, which only strengthened the story. And then the bomb dropped. Military widows robbed by the system that should protect them. Headline, front page. A 4,000-word story detailing everything. Names, numbers, evidence, photos of the widows including Claire with the girls, looking directly at the camera with wounded but intact dignity. Devastating quotes. "They made me feel like a criminal for trying to feed my children. I lost my husband, serving my country. And then the country robbed me." The impact was immediate and massive. The story spread. It was picked up by national media. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. They all covered it. Social media exploded. Hashtag Justice for Military Widows started trending. Senators made outrage statements. Veterans organized protests. Public pressure was overwhelming. And when public pressure reaches that level, the system is forced to act quickly. Margaret Oakes was arrested 3 days after the story broke. Federal charges: wire fraud, theft of government funds, conspiracy. Daniel Reese wasn't arrested. He had a better lawyer and deeper connections, but he resigned to spend more time with his family. Translation: he resigned before being fired and potentially indicted. A full federal investigation was opened. The FBI assigned a team. The Inspector General of the Department of Veterans Affairs initiated an audit of all benefit cancellations in the last 5 years. And Claire's benefit. It was restored immediately. Not just restored, all back payments were paid retroactively, with interest. And it came with an official letter. We sincerely apologize for the error and the distress caused. Ms. Hamilton is completely exonerated of all claims. Her benefit has been restored to its full amount and will be processed with priority from now on. Claire was exonerated. Completely. Publicly, officially. When she received the news call from Ben saying it's over, you won, her legs gave way. She literally fell to her knees, right there in the middle of the kitchen, phone still in her hand, and she cried. She cried like she hadn't cried since James's funeral. But this time, it wasn't just sadness or despair. It was relief so profound it physically hurt. It was justice. It was validation. It was the end of a nightmare that had consumed months of her life. Ben was at the door 15 minutes later. He had dropped everything and driven there the moment he realized, from the tone of her voice on the phone, that she needed someone. He went in. She had left the door unlocked for him, something she now did automatically, and found her still on the kitchen floor, trembling, crying, laughing, all at the same time. He knelt beside her. He pulled her into a tight embrace. "It's over," he whispered against her hair. "You're safe. The girls are safe. It's over." Claire clung to him like an anchor in the middle of a storm. "I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Is this real? Is this real?" "It's real. Completely real. You've been exonerated. Publicly. Everyone knows now that you never did anything wrong." Claire pulled back enough to look into his face, and what Ben saw in her eyes was something that changed everything between them. It wasn't just gratitude, although gratitude was there. It wasn't just relief. It was something deeper. It was love. Grown slowly over weeks of shared struggle, of mutual vulnerability, of constant presence. It was love that hadn't been sought but had grown nonetheless, because sometimes the most real things are the ones that happen when you're not trying to force them. Claire leaned in slowly, giving him a chance to pull back if he wanted. But Ben didn't pull back. He met her midway, and when they kissed, it was unlike any kiss either of them had ever experienced. It wasn't explosive passion. It was something softer, deeper. It was an unspoken promise of a new beginning, of a future neither of them had thought possible weeks ago. That pain doesn't have to be permanent. That broken people can mend each other. That love can happen again, even when you think it's over. Forever. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes. "Ben, Claire began, but didn't know how to finish. How do you thank someone for literally saving your life? For believing when no one else did? For fighting when you had no strength left to fight?" Ben gently placed his finger on her lips. "You don't need to say anything. I know." And he did know, because he felt the same. The girls arrived home from school. An hour later, the neighbor had started picking them up again now that Claire was no longer a social outcast, and found their mother and the sheriff sitting at the table, surrounded by papers and with huge smiles on their faces. "Girls," Claire said, her voice still hoarse from crying, but full of happiness. "We have good news. Very good news. Everything's been resolved. Mom's no longer in trouble, and our money's back. Everything's back." Emma and Sophie didn't fully understand what that meant, but they understood that their mother was happy, truly happy, for the first time in months. So they were happy too. They jumped, they screamed, and they threw themselves into a family hug that naturally included Ben. In the following weeks, Claire's life began to normalize. Benefits were deposited regularly. Bills were paid on time. There was enough food. She slept better. There were fewer nightmares. The girls started laughing more. The town, ashamed of the national exposure of how it had treated Claire, made a conscious effort to correct its behavior. Neighbors who had turned their backs on her now brought casseroles and apologies we didn't know. "Sorry for not believing you." Claire accepted politely, but didn't forget. She knew now who had stayed and who had run when things got tough. And Ben became part of their family organically, gradually. He'd come over for dinner 2 or 3 times a week. He helped with homework. He watched children's movies on the couch with the girls nestled on either side of him. The girls started calling him Uncle Ben, naturally, without anyone suggesting it, and Claire realized that her family could grow again. Not replacing James, never replacing him. His memory was there. It always would be. Photos of him still on the walls. Stories about him still told. But there was also room for something new. Something precious. Something that didn't diminish what came before, but added to what could come after. One night, after the girls had gone to sleep, Ben and Claire sat on the small porch. He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Claire, I know it's early. I know you're still processing everything, but I need you to know. I fell in love with you. I don't know exactly when it happened. It was gradual, but it happened, and I don't expect anything. I'm not pressuring you. I just wanted you to know." Claire turned to him, her eyes shining in the street lamplight. "I fell in love with you too, and I feel guilty about it because James is still here." She touched her chest. "He's still in my heart, and I don't know if he'll ever stop being there." Ben squeezed her hand. "And he doesn't have to. Love isn't finite. You can love the memory of James and still have room for someone else. And I'll never ask you to choose. I'll never compete with him. He deserves the place he has in your heart. He always will." And in that moment, Claire knew she had found something rare. A man who understood. Someone who wasn't jealous of ghosts. Someone who respected her past while offering her a future. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because for 3 months, 3 blessed and almost normal months, Claire allowed herself to believe that the nightmare was truly over, that she and the girls could finally breathe, that the future was no longer something frightening, but something potentially good. She had started smiling more. The girls were thriving. Emma had made a new best friend at school. Sophie was finally sleeping through the night without waking up from nightmares. Ben had become an essential part of their lives in a way that seemed inevitable, as if it had always been meant to be. They had established a routine. Ben had dinner with them on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and always on Sundays. He taught Emma to ride a bike in the park, something she had asked for, and that James would have done if he had lived long enough. Ben took Sophie to the library every Saturday because she had developed an obsession with books about space. And little by little, without haste, without pressure, he and Claire had begun to build something real. They hadn't yet talked about living together. They hadn't yet made formal promises. But there was a tacit understanding that they were moving in that direction. That a family was being formed, not despite the trauma, but through it. Claire had even started making plans. She had enrolled in an online course to finish college. She was thinking about eventually working not out of immediate financial need, but because she wanted purpose beyond being a mother. Ben encouraged this. He offered to help with the girls when she needed to study. He was there not just as a boyfriend, but as a genuine partner. And for the first time since James's death, Claire allowed herself to think, maybe I deserve to be happy. Maybe that's allowed. And then came the envelope. It was a Tuesday. Exactly 3 months after the story in the newspaper. Claire had just returned from the market. With the girls, they had stopped for ice cream, a small luxury she could now afford without paralyzing guilt. They were laughing, chatting about some silly school thing, completely normal. Claire absent-mindedly picked up the mail from the mailbox as she climbed the stairs to her house. Bills, advertisements, and a brown envelope with no return address. Something in her stomach tightened immediately, a visceral memory of the last envelope she'd received. But she pushed the fear down. It couldn't be anything bad. It was over. It was settled. Officially. Publicly. Then she opened it. Inside, a single photograph, and the world stopped. It was a photo of her, of Ben, of the girls, taken in the park. She recognized the moment last Sunday, when Ben had pushed Sophie on the swing, while Emma showed Claire the somersault she had learned. Claire remembered laughing, being happy, being present in that perfect moment, and someone had photographed it. without their knowledge, without permission, from an angle that indicated they were being watched from a distance, that someone was hiding, observing, documenting. Claire's hands began to tremble. She turned the photo over and saw the message, handwritten, careful cursive writing that somehow made the words even more sinister. You thought it was over? Your sheriff destroyed careers, destroyed families. Someone will pay, and it will start with those he loves. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Her legs went weak. She leaned against the wall, trying to breathe, trying not to completely panic in front of the girls who were still happy, carefree, taking off their shoes in the doorway. "Girls," she said, and her voice came out strange, forced. "Go to your room and play. Mommy needs to make a call." They looked at her curiously but obeyed. The moment they were out of sight, Claire collapsed. She sat on the floor, right there in the hallway, clutching the photo in hands that trembled so violently she could barely hold it. All the memories came flooding back. The fear, the despair, the feeling of being hunted. And now it wasn't just her. It was the girls. It was Ben. It's going to start with the one he loves. It was a threat, direct, unequivocal. Claire picked up the phone, her hands trembling. She dialed Ben. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful. "Hey, I was just thinking about you. I'm still at work, but I should leave in. Ben." Her voice came out broken, terrified. "I need you here. Now. Please." His tone changed instantly. "What happened? Are you okay?" The girls, physically, yes, but please, just come. Now. Ben arrived in 12 minutes, record time. He went in and found her still on the hallway floor, holding the photo. He knelt beside her. "Claire." "What?" She handed him the photo without saying anything. She watched as he read. She saw his jaw clench. She saw the anger welling up in his eyes. But she also saw something more troubling. Recognition. As if he had kind of expected something like this. "You knew this could happen," Claire said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Ben sighed heavily. I considered the possibility. "When I exposed Margaret and Daniel, I knew it would have repercussions. I knew they had connections, people who would be angry. But I thought the anger would be directed at me. Not at you. Never at you. Who ordered this? Who wants to hurt us? I don't know. But I'll find out." Ben took the photo, put it in a plastic bag of evidence. He called a colleague to come stay at the house while he investigated. Claire was too terrified to protest. And when Ben left, she locked all the doors, checked all the windows, and sat with the girls, trying to pretend everything was normal, while inside, she was falling apart again. Ben returned 3 hours later. His expression said it all. He had discovered something. They sat at the kitchen table, voices low so as not to startle the girls who were watching a movie in the living room. The envelope was mailed locally. No useful fingerprints. Photo was taken with a professional camera. Angle suggests telephoto lens. Whoever did this has resources. They're planning it. It's not an empty threat. Who? Claire asked, her voice breaking. Who would do this? Ben hesitated. Daniel Reese resigned, but wasn't indicted. He's still in town. He lost his career, his reputation, and will probably face civil lawsuits from the other widows. His life was destroyed, and he blames me, and by extension, you. So what do we do? Police. Protection. I already reported it. But vague threats without concrete action. There's not much they can do officially. They'll increase patrols in the area, but it's not enough, Claire finished. Ben took her hands. I won't let anything happen to you, or to the girls, I promise. But Claire, you need to understand, this could escalate. And if it escalates, you and the girls might need to leave town for a while. Go somewhere safe while I deal with this. Run away. Claire felt anger mixed with fear. After everything we've fought for, now we have to run away. Not run away. Protect. There's a difference. Claire looked at him. She saw the worry, the barely concealed fear, and she realized something. Justice had come at a price. They had won. They had exposed corruption. They had saved not only her but other widows. But victory had made enemies. Enemies with anger, with resources, with nothing to lose. And now, someone wanted revenge, and was willing to go after not Ben directly, but the one he loved. Because that was the cruelest form of revenge. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened in the 48 hours following that photo was an escalation of tension that no one expected, but that everyone should have seen coming. Because powerful people who lose everything rarely accept defeat gracefully. And Daniel Reese had lost everything: career, reputation, future. And he had decided that if he was going down, he was going to take someone down with him. The second message arrived the next day. This time not by mail. It was left on Claire's car windshield while she was inside the supermarket with the girls. When she returned, she saw the envelope. This time, she opened it right there in the parking lot, with the girls still putting bags in the trunk. It was another photo of the girls leaving school, alone, vulnerable, and on the back, so easy to get close to them. So easy. Claire didn't wait. She didn't try to be strong. She called Ben, her hands trembling so much she could barely dial. He's following the girls. He photographed them at school. Ben, She couldn't finish. Ben was there in 5 minutes. This time he didn't ask. He decided, "You're going to my parents' house, 3 hours from here. He doesn't know where it is. You stay there while I sort this out. It's not negotiable, Claire." Claire wanted to argue. She wanted to say she wasn't going to run away. But then she looked at Emma and Sophie in the back seat, completely oblivious to the danger, still laughing at something silly, and realized that her pride didn't matter. Their safety mattered. So she nodded. "How long?" "As long as it takes." Ben drove them there, personally. He drove for 3 hours, obsessively checking his mirrors to make sure they weren't being followed. His parents, a couple in their 70s, who immediately welcomed Claire and the girls as family had. A house on a secluded farm, safe, far away. He stayed one night, making sure they were settled in, that they had everything they needed. And then, before leaving the next morning, he pulled Claire aside for a private conversation. "I'll put an end to this," he said. It wasn't an empty promise. It was a statement of fact. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're safe. And when it's resolved, I'll come back. And we'll pick up where we left off. Okay?" Claire cupped his face in her hands. "You have to promise you'll stay safe too. Not just us, you. Please." Ben kissed her forehead. "I promise. Now, take care of the girls. And trust me." What Ben did when he returned to town walked a fine line between law enforcement and vigilantism. He used every resource, every contact, every ounce of authority and influence. He tracked down Daniel Reese. He found out he'd been living in an isolated cabin since his resignation. He was bitter, drinking heavily, posting disturbing things on social media about justice and making them pay. Ben coordinated with the FBI, which still had an active investigation. They obtained a search warrant based on the threats. When they entered the cabin, they found a mural. Photos of Claire, of the girls, of Ben, connected with red lines, written plans. Not specific enough to be evidence of a conspiracy, but disturbing enough to show dangerous obsession. Daniel was arrested, this time with charges that would stick: stalking, criminal harassment, terrorist threats. No bail because he was considered a flight risk and a danger to the community. Ben called Claire the night of the arrest. "It's over. For real this time. He's been arrested. He's not getting out. You can go home." Claire felt such intense relief that she fell to a sitting position. "Are you sure? Really sure?" "Absolutely. You're safe. The girls are safe. You can go back." They returned 2 days later, and life, slowly, carefully, began to normalize again. But this time with a new awareness, with the understanding that safety is not guaranteed, that victory has a price, but also with profound gratitude for having survived, for being together, for having found each other amidst all of that. 6 months later, Ben proposed to Claire. It wasn't dramatic. It was a normal Tuesday, after a simple dinner, with the girls already asleep. He simply took her hand and said, "I want to make this official. I want to be a real family. You, me, Emma, Sophie. What do you think?" Claire cried. But they were good tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married 3 months later, a small ceremony, just family and close friends. Emma was a bridesmaid. Sophie carried the rings, and when Ben and Claire exchanged vows, they weren't empty words about "until death do us part." They were promises based on everything they had survived together, on trust built through fire, on love that had grown not despite the trauma, but through it. And for the first time since James's death, Claire looked to the future and saw not fear, but possibility, not an end, but a beginning. Not alone, but surrounded by family, one she had lost, one she had built, and one that had been given to her when she needed it most. Look, if you've made it this far with me, if you've felt every moment of this journey with Claire and Ben, you know this story is about much more than romance or justice. It's about resilience, about ordinary people facing impossible systems and refusing to give up, about finding hope when all seems lost, about how sometimes the right people appear exactly when you need them most. If this kind of story resonates with you, if you want to continue following narratives like this deep, real, full of struggle but also hope, subscribing, here is the way to keep walking with me. And I need to know, are you with them? Do you believe that people like Claire deserve to fight and win? That people like Ben really exist? Then comment below. I'm with you until the end. Let me see how many people truly understand the weight of this journey. If this touched you in any way, if at any point you felt the injustice, the fear, the hope, the love growing amidst the chaos, leave a like so I know. Because these stories matter. These connections matter. And knowing that there are people on the other side who feel this as deeply as I do, that makes it all worthwhile. And there's a video here that continues in the same vein. Another story of someone being destroyed by a system that should protect them, but finding strength where they least expect it. Finding allies, finding love. Click and follow me there. Why these journeys? They never truly end. There's always more story to tell. There are always more people who need to be seen. And I want you with me for all of them.